Hello and welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott, pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California. And we are in chapter 8 of the book of Acts. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and then we got Acts. The Acts means that it gives a story of some of the early period of Christian history. Beginning with the crucifixion, resurrection of Jesus, on and on, until about 60 A.D., about 60. Acts is probably written someplace in the late 40s, early 50s, by the only non-Jewish writer named Luke. He wrote the Gospel of Luke. He wrote the book of Acts, and so that's how that is. He became a Christian later on in life. Was a doctor, and Dr. Luke, and he wrote this incredible pieces, the Gospel of Luke and also the book of Acts. So here we are, Acts chapter 8, and beginning with verse 26. So. And it's titled Philip and the Ethiopian Eunuch. Now Philip, he was one of the seven. They were so busy they had to have other people, the apostles, take care of all of the things that had to be done. And so the church itself, the congregation, chose these seven. The apostles didn't. Seven, and Philip was one of these. And, of course, my name, Philpott, comes from this. It's actually a French Norman name. It would have been pronounced Philippo in that day. But when one of my relatives went to England, it got changed to Philippot and then the Philpott. It means just son of Philip. That's all it means. Okay. There are three words that are used for love, by the way, in the Scripture. Eros, phileo, from the Philip, and then agape, which was the newest word and first time appears in our New Testament. So here is Luke, the only Bible writer, not a Jewish person. He wrote the Gospel of Luke and Acts. Ethiopia is on the eastern side of Africa. I have a good friend by the name of Jabesa, who is from there, and we'll be seeing him soon again, but he's an Ethiopian, and it's you can see on the map, and at that point it was a very highly developed era. And the eunuch will be described as a God-fearer here. A eunuch was somebody who would have their gonads cut off. They couldn't have children. They could be married, but they couldn't have children. And it was what they did. I've read a little bit about why they did that. It's a little complicated, but we're going to find one of these in our story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. And so this is really the story of an incredible miracle. Verse 26. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, remember he's one of the, what do you call a deacon maybe? One of the seven. And now an angel of the Lord said to Philip. Now that's a very curious thing. And I've preached this at our Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley. And I tried to picture what that might look like. And I really never came up with anything that I felt like I could legitimately say, this is it. It's, I don't know how it is, but anyway, some interaction between an angel of the Lord and this guy, Philip, one of the seven, said this, rise. You could translate the word, get ready. Rise and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. Now, Gaza, it's been around for a long time, and it's in the newspapers every day today. Gaza. Gaza was interesting, was destroyed in 57 BC, but rebuilt later on by Pompey, a Roman general. Interesting. So Jerusalem would be up here, Gaza would be moving a little more toward the Mediterranean Sea along the coast. It was a way that this guy was going to go back to Ethiopia. He had come up from Ethiopia, now he's going back, and he's a person of some importance, you'll see. Okay. And he says, from Jerusalem to Gaza, this is a desert place. Yes, it is. And so that's the way it is. It still is that day. That's the way it is. And this area would have been a little south of Gaza. Verse 27. And he rose and went, and there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace. Now this is somebody of importance. This is somebody that has a very high position. I have to explain this. A court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasure. Now, her husband was a king, but the way the Ethiopians did it, they referred to the number one person as a child of the sun, and he was too sacred to do any real work, so the queen, his wife, did the work. Okay, so this Ethiopian eunuch was a court official of this Candace. Her husband was the king, but she ran stuff. Very interesting how that took place. And he was in charge of all her treasure. Wow. So this guy was highly appreciated, esteemed, and trusted. And a big deal. He would have been probably the number 2 in political power and in Ethiopia. It says he had come to Jerusalem to worship. Now, this is an Ethiopian eunuch, and he's traveling a long way. Get yourself a map and see where Ethiopia, it's still the same place today. That's quite a trip. And through very difficult desert areas, very difficult space. And but he's doing it, and he had come to Jerusalem to worship. He was worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, coming to the temple, and so on. So here he is, and he's returning, and is seated in his chariot. It could more easily be described as a covered wagon, or not like a stagecoach that we see in Western movies, but it was likely another driver sitting in the front, and he was sitting in a space in the back. Wasn't riding a horse or anything like that, but was in, as it says here, his chariot. And one my commentator said it could be translated covered wagon with a top over it, because there you are in the sun. So a covered wagon is probably the best idea. Seated in his chariot, and he was reading the prophet Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah. Now I'm going to read a little passage in Isaiah in a little bit. He would have been reading the Greek, very likely the Septuagint, that had been, the Hebrew Bible had been put into Greek. It's called the Septuagint, which means the 70. So he was reading Isaiah. The book of Isaiah was written between 750 and 780 years prior. He was one of the great prophets, Isaiah, one of the great books, the prophet Isaiah. And so he's reading, he's able to afford to buy a copy of that, which would have been scrolls on parchment paper, rolled up, and probably wouldn't have been room enough in the covered wagon that he was riding in to have everything, but here he's looking at Isaiah. I like to say if we didn't have our New Testament, but we had just the book of Isaiah, we find everything about Christianity that there is. Close. I may be going a little bit too far on that, but Isaiah is really, really an incredible piece. I'm going to read a couple little pieces here, and I'm going to read this one right now. Isaiah 56, verses 3 to 5. Again, 700 plus years before this event. So Isaiah 56, 3 to 5, I'm going to read it. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, a foreigner, say, the Lord will surely separate me from his people. And let not the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. I don't have time to go into all of that, but it's very incredible. Verse 4, for thus saith the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me, and hold fast my covenant, my agreement, I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and a name, better than sons and daughters. I will give him an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Isaiah chapter 56. So here we are. Rather incredible. And so he's reading prophet Isaiah, maybe the passage I just read. Who knows? Verse 29. And the Spirit said to Philip, how that took place. You know, when I have to preach these sermons at Miller Avenue Church, and it does not hurt me to explain that I really don't get something because the Scripture is complicated and it's not easily understood all the time. I would say I get maybe 80%, maybe a little less, a little more, I don't know. But I have to admit that there are many places in the Scripture that I am unsure whether I am interpreting them right or not. The basics are all clear. Who Jesus is, what Jesus is, clear as a bell. I mean, without question. But so many other things like this don't have. Often commentators will say Luke cuts out a lot of stuff because he's not going to take time to be all this stuff. We're glad it would be too much. The Bible would be that much thicker. You know, it's already pretty big. And so Luke and other gospel writers, they will cut to the chase. So anyway, verse 29 says, and the Spirit said to Philip, again, go over and join this chariot. I have a little note above that actually that would have been fairly loud. You're going to see in just a minute. Go over and join this chariot. Now, the Spirit of God puts Philip in this place. Maybe it's a time when they're stopped at some place, maybe to eat, maybe to get some water. But at this point, he says, go over and join this chariot. The way I read it, it has to have been standing still. It says, so Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, do you understand what you're reading? That's very interesting. So Philip runs over to where here the Ethiopian eunuch is, sitting in this covered wagon, I'd like to say, and he heard him reading. Now, the interesting thing about this is, in that day and age, people didn't read silently. We read silently. They said it out loud. I've read that several times, enough over the years to say that was the practice in that day. They weren't reading to themselves without any noise. They were reading out loud, even if they were by themselves. So he heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, do you understand what you're reading? So I read you the passage in Isaiah about the eunuch. 750 plus years or so before, Isaiah had already written about this. So here it is fulfilled in this most interesting way. It's actually absolutely incredible to see this. One of the incredible things is, when you start out as a Christian reading the Bible, and then after a while you say, wow, what a document. Isn't this incredible? Anyway, so he says, do you understand what you're reading? And he said, how can I, unless someone guides me? Now, here's a very humble guy. In other words, you might have easily said, I need some help. I need a little help here. How can I unless someone guides me? I remember prior to my becoming a Christian that I understood very little about Christianity. I would try to read a Bible. I couldn't make sense of it. And I remember one day just picking it up and throwing it and saying, I want that Bible out of here. I couldn't make sense of it at all. Anyway, I got to hurry on. And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. So there it is. You can see what has to have been, sort of a buggy kind of thing. Now, the passage of Scripture that he was reading was this, and Luke gives it to us. It's Isaiah 53. The other passage was Isaiah 56. Now, this is Isaiah chapter 53, verses 7 to 8. Okay? He's reading this. The prophets, from verse chapter 42 of Isaiah, for a long way, focuses on the coming of the Messiah, the coming of the Christ. And so this is one of those passages. Here's what it says. Like a sheep that is led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before its shearers is silent. In other words, this is a sacrificial animal. Would have been well understood in that day and in the day that we're talking about. Like a lamb before its shearer is silent. It's going to be killed. So he opens not his mouth. Jesus never protested. Jesus didn't argue his way out of anything. He didn't. He was like that sheep, that lamb. So he opens not his mouth. The silent lamb. This is the Messiah, the Christ, who came to die in our place. Verse 33, Isaiah 53, 33. In his humiliation, interesting word, justice was denied him. It's looking forward to the Messiah. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. He was beaten, whipped, and stripped naked on the cross. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. His crucifixion was unlawful and not guilty. And there he was, naked with the crown of thorns on his head. And the second part of Isaiah 53 says, who can describe his generation, this death of the Lamb? They didn't understand what they were doing. They didn't understand what was happening. Then it says, for his life is taken away from the earth. So here's the sheep, the sacrificial lamb. His life is taken away. By the way, the word life is Zoe, Z-O-E in our language, my mother's first name. Zoe, not bios. Bios is biological life. Zoe is far more than that, far more encompassing. For his life is taken away from the earth. A theology of suffering. This is oftentimes referred to. Now, Acts chapter 34 through the verse 40. I'm going to be able to get this done, I think. So now we know the next part. Verse 34 says, and the eunuch said to Philip, about whom, I ask, does the prophet say this? About himself or someone else? Legitimate question, isn't it? And here the eunuch, well, we don't have the name of the eunuch. He's just the eunuch. Philip said to Philip, what's this about? Is he saying it about himself? Isaiah saying it's about himself or about someone else? Of course, Philip is going to be able to answer that question. He knows who it is. This ancient prophecy, Isaiah. Verse 35, then Philip opened his mouth. Another way of saying began to talk, but it says opened his mouth. When you're reading the New Testament in particular, you'll see all these indications of how the people thought and presented. And so this is one of those interesting things. So Philip opened his mouth, started talking, beginning with this scripture. He told him the good news about Jesus. And he's got the scroll, and we have no idea of the time aspect here that's going on and how long this takes. And so beginning with the scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. We wish that Luke had written a little bit more and not such a truncated presentation, but we just have to imagine a little bit. And so verse 36 says, and as they were going along the road, they came to some water. This indicates that a lot has gone on. I would imagine a long period of time has transpired from when Philip joined with the eunuch, a considerable period of time. He would have had to explain a great deal, interpreting that passage from Isaiah, but also explaining what had happened to Jesus. And so many other details. Luke just doesn't present it all. So we have this big area we just assume is taking place. So they came to some water, and the eunuch said, see, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized? So Philip had to have spoken of Jesus' baptism and of their own baptism. And let me tell you, the whole idea of baptism is extremely complex, way complex. And I don't have the time to go into it now. It's something that I've been working on now here for a few months, trying to get a fuller grasp on this word baptism, what it means, etc., etc. But anyway, he wants to be baptized. Verse 38, and he commanded the chariot to stop. So they're moving. They're not just sitting, now they're moving. So you have a sense of passage of time. He wants to be baptized. And he commanded the chariot to stop. Obviously, he's not the driver. And there is, here, there's a verse left out. From my translation goes from 36 to 38. A chapter of verse 37, which is omitted here, but is in the King James Version. But P45, Papyrus 74, Alexandrinus, Vaticanus, some of the best manuscripts leave out verse 37, but I'm going to read it to you real quick. And Philip said, if thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That was very, very likely added many hundreds of years after Luke wrote this passage. So we go to verse 38. He commanded the chariot to stop, and they both went down into the water. No sprinkling of water. They went down into the water, because to baptize means is to put under and bring up. I don't have the time to tell you all the significance and what that means. When he came out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more and went on his way rejoicing. Wow. I have a little note written. It says, not until the 300s is there evidence of a church in Ethiopia, but there is a large Christian community in the city, the nation, ancient city of Ethiopia. So he's gone. He carried Philip away, whatever that means. We don't know. It's very hard to picture it. Verse 40. But Philip found himself at Azotus, It's on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, very parallel to the city of Jerusalem. And as he passed through, he preached the gospel to all the towns until he came to Caesarea, which up north, just actually outside of the area of Israel. So, and that's where Philip lived. And he's the guy who was quite something. We'll be reading more about Philip later on. Okay, that's it. And it's very interesting to look at this ancient material and how the message of Jesus is spreading. It's now spreading. It's growing. So we have the gospel communicated to a slave. We have the message of Jesus communicated to non-Jewish people, even in foreign countries. So that's the story Luke is presenting, the growth, how Christianity spread in the very early years. Until next time, so long.